Tonight. My name is Casey Greer. Welcome. We are so excited to have you all. This is our third installment of our Seeing Beyond series with Dr. Porter. And we're so happy to have him here and here with Chuck Huss, also, who they're a dream team to talk about this topic. So we're really excited, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So I'll hand it over to both of you.
Don't say them cells were finna get wrong.
Oh, hold on. I think someone's not muted. I'm gonna make sure everyone's muted. If you're joining us, welcome. Just make sure to mute yourself, or I'll do it for you if you can't find it. But anyway, I will let you both introduce yourselves. Thank you so much for being here, and we're excited to see your presentation.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Porter, Dr. Tom Porter. I'm the Director of Low Vision Services at St. Louis University in the Department of Ophthalmology. And my partner here, Chuck, will introduce himself in a minute. But gosh, we've worked together for the last 7 or 8 NOAA meetings as a pre-conference driving forum, and I have the utmost respect for Chuck and his knowledge. I do the easy part, he does the tough part. So, Chuck, if you want to say a few words, and then we'll get started.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm over here on the East Coast, so it's a little bit later for me versus West Coast. But my background is in orientation and mobility. I've been cross-trained in bioptic driving as a driver rehabilitation specialist. And my years of experience have been with the West Virginia Division of Rehab Services. So while Tom takes things from a clinical low vision perspective, I'm going to be taking them from a formalized bioptic driver training process perspective. Back to you, Tom.
Okay. And what Chuck just said is very, very important. In my opinion, the easy part is identifying and fitting the hardware, the bioptic telescope. What makes the difference between being successful and unsuccessful is in the training that's involved. So we'll go ahead and get started, and then Chuck, I'm going to really depend on you to rescue us. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. Let's see. Where is my slideshow? Just hang on. Something got in the way. Okay, hang on. I got to say okay. And then you get out of the way again. Okay. Come on now. Hang on, everybody.
I think it's right there at the top.
Where is it?
Your mouse is right by it. It says slideshow.
Right there.
Okay. Well, I've got transitions, but there's something in the way of that right now. Maybe.
Oh.
Let's see. How can I get that out of the way? There. Finally, it's gone.
There we go. Yep.
Here we go.
We can see it. It looks great.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks everybody for coming, and I apologize for the technical problems. My young daughter is not available today to rescue me, so it's dependent on me. So as I said, I'm the Director of Low Vision Services at St. Louis U, and we're going to talk about bioptic telescopes from a clinician's perspective, and then we're going to have somebody fill in the gaps that I can't talk about. So what I'm going to go over is the basic types of telescopes that are used in low vision applications. I'm going to talk a little bit about the basic fitting of a bioptic telescope. And I'm going to let you get inside my head and see the things that I'm considering when you come to me or your low vision doctor, what they're considering when they're doing the fitting. And then some of the things that you as the driver have to consider. I'll share some bits and pieces, and off we go. So if anyone says, I know a doctor who fits special driving glasses, we're almost always talking about bioptic telescopes. And a bioptic is simply a pair of eyeglasses that has a miniature telescope mounted toward the top of the glasses, allowing the user to scan between a magnified and an unmagnified image. And as Chuck may point out, you don't just drive looking through the telescope. My analogy for normally sighted folks is using a rear view mirror. You glance at the rear view mirror and then immediately go back to looking what's ahead. Well, with a bioptic, you drop your head, get the magnified view, and then immediately go back to the full field. This is sort of my slide that I put in every single program that I talk about. We always want to keep it simple in helping people with reduced vision. I'm always manipulating three variables. I'm trying to enhance contrast, and I spoke about this at length at one of our meetings before. Contrast loss is well, let's say it a different way. Contrast appreciation is the ability to visually separate what you're trying to see from the background. You can imagine that a white dog on a snowstorm disappears, but a black dog shows up. That's examples of low and high contrast and glare control. In albinism, it's a disorder that glare is the thing that we hear over and over again. But testing shows that people with albinism also have reduced contrast sensitivity. So that's one thing I have to think about. The second thing is I have to magnify the image large enough that you can identify what you need to identify to go on. And then the real key on all of this is help the patient learn to use their vision most constructively. And tonight we're going to be talking about being able to use the device and the vision to learn how to use that at its best way. Okay, let's see. And it's like my screen is okay. So I always like to think in very simple terms. A good camera with a bad roll of film always takes a blurry picture, and the retina acts like a roll of film in a camera. Um, Focusing a camera with a bad roll of film doesn't improve the photo, and with the human eye, refraction, the eyeglass prescription part, is limited by how healthy or how good the retina is. But since a stronger lens won't help, we can't make it sharper, but we certainly can magnify the image. So you're all familiar with magnifying glasses and things like that. The only tool for magnifying distance objects is a telescope, and they help you identify detail further away. Where I think the real value of bioptic is, if you can identify a detail further away, you're buying time to make a critical decision. If I can put a bioptic on someone and have them identify an object 3 times earlier, then I'm adding a real margin of safety. In the photos here, off to the left, these are what I'll call off-the-shelf telescopic aids. They're definitely not used for driving. The middle picture is a handheld, and the bottom picture is a better representation of what a bioptic is going to look like. You can see the young lady is looking underneath that telescope, and a slight drop of the head would bring her into. Okay. Oops, sorry. There are two different designs in telescopic aids. Um, the Galilean telescope and Keplerian, and they can be handheld or they can be spectacle mounted. This is a little guy with a handheld telescope versus this young man who again has a spectacle mounted telescope. Galilean telescopes are the simplest of all telescopes. It's just 2 lenses and a barrel, and that has some advantages and a couple disadvantages too. The first thing is it's this simple 2 lens design. The second thing is it's very, very bright because the fewer lenses that light has to pass through, the brighter the image to the eye will be. They're very short, and I'll be showing you a picture or two of the opposite kind, and you'll see that they're much longer and more clumsy. They're lightweight because of only 2 lenses, and they're very easy for a clinician like me to fit. They have something called an exit pupil that's quite large on a Galilean versus with the Keplerian design. It's much dimmer and smaller. They're typically afocal, and what that means is it's not focusable. It's automatically focused at 20 feet and beyond. In optics, infinity is beyond 20 feet. And if you think about it, in in the use of a telescope for driving, the things that you're going to be trying to see are going to be at that point of 20 feet and beyond. Okay, but a limited power range. They rarely come any higher than 5 times magnification. And these are some examples of Galilean telescopes. Again, they're very simple designs. You can tell they're short. They would be very lightweight. A Keplerian telescope is a different design. It's more complicated. And because of the design of it, it has to have extra lenses within it. If you remember, the Galilean telescope just had a front and a back lens. But the way that this telescope works is if we don't put these prisms inside, and that's what my little triangles are, the image would actually be upside down. It would be inverted. So now we've got 4 lenses that light has to pass through in order for it to work. And what I said earlier was every lens that it has to go through decreases the amount of light getting into the eye. So they're not as bright as Galilean. They're longer. They're much heavier because there are more lenses. The exit pupil that I was talking about is much smaller, and it's virtual, so it's harder to fit. They have to be perfectly aligned, but they are focusable. I have Keplerian telescopes that I use that can focus from 18 inches to infinity, and the powers are much broader, up to 10 times. And these are some examples of any of you who have looked into bioptic telescopes. My friend Dr. Henry Green has a company called Occutech, and his design of a Keplerian, he's folded it sideways, where she actually is looking into the telescope with her right eye, but the objective lens is on the over her left eye. This is the more standard design, and you can see how long and how it would be kind of cumbersome to use this. So this is a neat design. I still use all of these, but again, this is something that's become more and more popular. So exactly what a bioptic telescope is. They're custom made. They're not something where we can take them off the shelf. They allow 2 lines of sight, one through the telescope and the other through the carrier lens. And this is an example of that. You can see that this young man is looking under the telescope for most things. But if he drops his head down, it shows him looking at an airplane, but if he'd drop his head down, he'd get the magnified image. And primarily, bioptic telescopes are used for driving. I've used them in vocational rehabilitation cases where a person had a vocation where they had to, for instance, read a metered gauge that was 15 or 20 feet away and also be able to look underneath it. But again, driving is the number one. So considerations in choosing the telescope that I plan to use on fitting you with the telescope is what's the application? And if it's driving, then my thought is that I want it to be as lightweight as I can have it, because that just very simply keeps the telescope where it belongs on your head. What's the telescopic power required? And there's a trade-off on a telescope. The higher the power, the more constricted the visual field is. So I really go with the power that will get me to the goal visual acuity that we need to get you legal in that state, but really as low as I can to get that so that I get a good field of view. Cosmesis, cosmetic appearance, is something that patients often will question. But again, I look at this more as a tool, and function is the most important there. And then ergonomics, how does it actually fit on your face? So there are miniaturized telescopes, and I showed a picture back a ways, and 20 years ago they were the hottest thing, but they're so small that they give a very narrow field of view. The exit pupil's hard to fit, keeping them aligned. And of all the patients I've fit in my career, I only have one who continues to use it and is a driver. The exit pupil size and brightness is a real problem. The weight of a monocular system. Now, more often than not, I will put a telescope in front of each eye. Um, Even if there's a fair amount of difference in vision. And I do that because without it, the telescope side is heavier, making the glasses sag down on one side. I can put a dummy telescope in just to balance out that weight. And then the lighter we can keep it, the more comfortable it's going to be for extended wear um, and such. Unlike when you go in to get a new pair of glasses, you're not going to have a lot of choices on frames, very honestly. The manufacturers of these telescopes have a very limited number of frames that they will mount a telescope in. Early in my career, um, before I realized how difficult it is to find the right frame, I was taking them off of our frame board, and invariably we'd go back and have to remount it in the frame that the manufacturer suggests. So it's got to be strong because this is more than just a pair of lenses. The earpieces have to be long enough to give a little bit of a wraparound on the earpieces. I like to have nose pads. Nose pads allow me to raise the telescope up if I need to, or lower it down. I can move it even side to side with nose pads. This number 5, the B measurement, is how deep the frame is. You'll never see a telescope mounted in a real shallow little frame. It just won't work. And remember, this is a tool. It's not a fashion statement. I In my clinic, I have a bunch of not prototype, but examples of bioptic telescopes, and they're all in old style, very black, heavy aluminum frames. I had a young man in the other day, and I said, "No, don't be taken back by the appearance of this." He said, "Oh man, I think it's great." So, maybe kids are getting smarter these days. Okay, so um, one of the critical measurements is how far apart the eyes are, because the telescope has to be perfectly aligned with the eyes in a straight ahead position. Um, what we will do is take the frame that we're going to mount the telescope in, put it on the face. My optician will adjust the earpieces and the nose pads so it's sitting just the way it's going to, and then we will dot where the pupil is. And that's what we refer to as our major reference point. We measure the distance between the two eyes from the nose, because most of us, our faces are not perfectly symmetrical, and it'll be a millimeter or two uh, more one way than the other. So again, that's what this is meant to show. So here we are. You can see this young lady has albinism, and we are measuring and dotting her pupil. We like to measure the pupil and then dot it rather than just go by the measurement alone. Sometimes we'll readjust the glasses. And then what I will do, and I don't know if I have a slide of this or not. Yeah. Okay. In this particular case, I was mounting this for a dental hygienist. But I will take these little reinforcing rings, and I will put it in the position that I propose the telescope to be in, just to make sure that the footprint of the telescope will not impinge on vision when you're looking straight ahead. Okay, hang on just a second. Um, okay. So custom mounted telescopes, eyewear's got to be fully adjusted to the wearer before the telescope. Um, and the second thing we're going to do is specify a certain type of lens material. It's something called CR39. I really prefer this over the others. You can't do it in glass. Some of my colleagues will use a material called polycarbonate. Polycarbonate's great, but it's going to be just a little bit softer and more likely to scratch. If the patient has an eyeglass prescription, uh, then it has to also be incorporated in the telescope. One of the tricks that I use, and many of my colleagues that are more experienced will use, is to tent the carrier lens. By tenting the regular spectacle lens, we can somewhat hide the appearance of the telescope. It's a small amount, but every little bit helps. Um, because folks with albinism are so very photophobic, they're always asking me about sunglasses. And my laboratory can take a cap that fits over the end of the telescope in a tent and any color that I want. So that it gives you the sun protection through the telescope. And the type of sunglasses that we usually use are actually slip behind telescopes where we drill a hole where the telescope protrudes through the back of the lens. Okay, for me to fit a telescope, I must know what the best corrected visual acuity, because that's going to dictate what power telescope I'm going to use. I I had a little guy in the other day, and his best corrected visual acuity was 2080. In the state that he's from, you if you can't correct the vision to better than 2070 with glasses, then the next step is to fit a bioptic telescope. Through the bioptic telescope, they have to achieve 2040 vision. So at 2080, I'm free to use a telescope in the 2.0 to 2.2 times magnification to get there, give me the acuity we need plus the visual field that we need. What's the patient's dominant eye? This gets kind of tricky. The dominant eye is sometimes, in disease processes, the dominant eye is sometimes the eye that will lose more vision. And if that's the case, we often have to use a technique to force the patient to sight through the telescope with the non-dominant eye. And then again, I talked about this earlier. Am I fitting monocularly or binocularly? And more frequently, I'm using binocularity because I want the telescope to fit flat. Nystagmus. Many of the folks with albinism have nystagmus, and what I have to keep in mind is what's the direction of this nystagmus, the amplitude of the movement, how much swinging back and forth is there, and then is there a null point where when the patient is really trying to get his best vision, do they cock their head one way or the other? And that may influence a little decentration on the telescope. Um, I'm going to give you an example of how a state's law can dictate the power and the type of telescope that's used. And I'm in St. Louis, and if you look there right in the middle, if you just throw a rock, you could probably throw it into Illinois. And our driving laws could not be more different. I fit just as many telescopes on Missouri drivers as Illinois, but in just a second, you'll see this. So Missouri has a progressive restriction law. If one's corrected to 2040 or better in the better seeing eye, they have an unrestricted license. 2060 to 2040 it would be daylight only. And then they start adding restrictions. 2060 to 2120 daylight only, local road. You have to take a road test with a highway patrolman. And even up to 2160, we can do that. But it doesn't mention bioptics. But if I fit one of these folks with a bioptic, I am buying them time and distance to make a decision. So this is why, even though we don't have a bioptic law, it doesn't preclude the use of it, but it doesn't mention it as a way to obtain the license. Illinois, on the other, has the law that I was speaking of. If the patient has worse than 2070 vision, but better than 2100 or better through a spectacle lens, I have the option of helping them with a bioptic. They want the bioptic to get the patient to about 2040 or better. And initially, that first year, all bioptic drivers are restricted to daylight only. Albinism is kind of a strange thing. They they tend to see better in low illumination rather than high illumination. And many of my uh, drivers with albinism have qualified after a road test to prove that they are competent to drive at night. So things that you have to consider, and I'm sure Chuck's going to go over this, but what are your state's visual requirements for driving? And do your homework, because most of my colleagues, I'm talking about just the eye doctors in and around my state, they don't know what our laws are. They assume that if your vision's worse than 2070, you can't drive. I get many referrals from Illinois because the eye doctors there really don't know either. So you do your homework. Dr. Google's pretty smart. There's a lot of information on the internet. You've got a resource like Chuck, who's just dying to get on here and share his information. Be prepared for frustration and bumps in the road when you're seeking information. Um, I can't emphasize enough this program that we're going to do in Columbus will be so helpful in preparing you for driving. It's just not the two of us that are going to be talking. There's a whole host of experts that will give you information. Almost in every case, you will have restrictions on when and where you can drive. They don't give unrestricted drivers privileges with bioptics. And license renewal may require a road test or frequent renewals than normally sighted folks. State of Illinois requires me to do a visual certification annually. So if you drive very long and you come to me in the state of Missouri, you know my wife's birthday and our anniversary and the dogs we've got. We know each other pretty well. If my state does not specifically mention bioptics for driving, why should I consider getting one? And I've said it over and over and over again. If you can buy distance and time in making critical decisions, that's a value for you. That could be a lifesaver for you. Will getting a bioptic reduce the restrictions? Nope, it won't. Getting fitted for a bioptic is only part of the process. I've fit hundreds and hundreds of bioptics. It's the beginning point, but it doesn't get you the license and it doesn't make you an appropriate driver. It just is the hardware that you need to go to the next step. What else? Probably not covered by your insurance. Be ready for that. I have to tell you honestly, I'm working right now with one of my patients trying to get his insurance to pay for his bioptic, but I can't tell you that that's something that you should expect. The cost, gosh, anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000, depending on the part of the country you're in and what type of telescope is necessary. Bioptics are only part of the cost. For safe use, bioptic drivers need specific training with an experienced instructor. And in a city the size of St. Louis, our metropolitan area is about 1.4 million. We have 2 people that actually have training and expertise in bioptic driving. Unfortunately, there's no registry of eye care professionals that have expertise in working with bioptics. There isn't like a registry you can go to and find it. So you're going to have to do a little research there. And I think, Chuck, rather than me taking questions now, why don't we turn it over to you and then we'll both work together at the end, if that sounds all right.
Sounds good with me.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to move now. We're going to move now from Tom's clinical perspective to what I refer to as driver training process perspective related to bioptic driving. And what I'd like to achieve in the next 20 minutes or so is to provide you an ever so brief overview of this training process based on the following. First of all, we're going to determine a baseline, or in other words, it's the initial screening that all of you who are going to be potential future bioptic drivers will have to go through, usually before that bioptic is ordered and before training is started. And from there, we're going to go to how are bioptic driving services delivered in your particular state or province. Next, we're going to take a look at what are the typical types of training you might be exposed to, as well as how do you go about finding a provider of bioptic driver training services. And then from there, we'll go to what are some of the different types of training, and then what determines from an instructor standpoint versus the client standpoint when you're ready for driver license testing. Initial screening. All of you, before you enter training, if it's required in your state or offered as an option, will probably go through this 3-tiered process after it's been determined that you qualify visually, as Tom indicated in the past half hour. So you'll go through an interview process, then a passenger in car, followed by a behind the wheel. One of the reasons why the interview process is so important is the fact that over the past 40 years, what I've liked to find out is the applicant, whether they're a novice candidate or an experienced candidate, assertive? And in other words, if they're accompanied by a parent or a guardian, who does the majority of responding to my questions? That's going to be very important that I know and that I share that with the in-car instructor before we get out under dynamic conditions. Then we proceed into passenger and car, where I find out a little bit of the driving knowledge and how active they were in the car in years past, or did they sit in the back seat and go to sleep or play video games? And then finally, the behind the wheel screening will really give us a good idea. Has that person ever used their distance vision in what we call a distant mode that's going to be required for driving? In other words, can they keep it between the mustard and the mayo, between the yellow line and the white line? How far out are they looking? Okay. Are they glued to that steering wheel? A lot of times you can tell if a person has basically no experience behind the wheel. In years past, one of the major findings that we found in the state of West Virginia by conducting a pilot study and then continuing that related services for another 10 years was that students who were found to be pre-driver ready should be able to illustrate the top 4 bulleted areas. And I would like to take a close look at these because they apply to a lot of things in life, but particularly travel. The first is you got to be able to take in some way, remember or retain, and be able to follow route instructions given them by an instructor. Secondly, whether it's done on foot or as a passenger in car or when you're behind the wheel, you have to be able to take those instructions and travel and then return to your starting point of a multi-block, multi-directional route. While conducting that route, you have to be able to detect, identify, and react in time to all critical objects that are presented there. For example, let's say you're walking along a block, or you're riding in cars, a passenger in car, or even if you're behind the wheel with a driving instructor, and you happen to see a vehicle that is backing out of a driveway. The instructor is going to allow you ample time to determine whether you can react on your own to the movement of that car backing. You don't necessarily have to identify the type of vehicle it is, but then you have to be able to react by placing your foot from the accelerator to the brake, just in case that person doesn't see you. And then the last bulleted area is you have to be able to approach, analyze, and then safely, effectively, and confidently cross both stop sign as well as traffic light controlled intersections in a variety of settings. I've added a 5th bulleted area, not based on our study, but based on my experience of working with a multidisciplinary team of professionals out in the state of Texas. It was over a decade from 2012 to 2022. And what we did was annually, we would bring in visually impaired Texas teens and their parents who had an interest in driving. And what we found out was by conducting post-evaluations at the end of that 3-day workshop, we asked a couple of questions that were related to what were some of the activities you liked the best about the workshop. And unanimously, we would always get, we liked the hand-on experience of using mock-up bioptic lens system provided by the vendors. Likewise, they also like to prove to mom and dad that they have sufficient vision to be able to drive, even though they were only positioned as a right front seat passenger in car. So what are the typical ways in which bioptic driving services, if they're required in your state or province or optional, how are they delivered? Basically, there's two ways. Sequentially, which means that where one type of service is initiated and completed satisfactorily before you proceed to the next. And sequentially arranged programs can take place over few weeks, few months, or like some places in Canada, they can extend over a year. Concurrently arranged programs usually are much intense, more combined to a shorter period of time, and it's where a student receives a set or an approximate number of classroom, passenger and car, and behind the wheel instruction, all within the same day for so many days a week, for so many consecutive weeks, until satisfactory completion of the program. We can get, for instance, in West Virginia, a 90-hour program done very effectively in 6 weeks' time. About 6 years ago, when COVID was taking place, I had some time to determine whether or not the staff that we had in-serviced and trained ever since we started our program back in 1985, all the way up to 2019, we wanted to find out how many of them actually went back and set up their own programs and how they compared to West Virginia's. And what we found from the 44 completed surveys representing 32 states was the following. The greater majority, as shown in this simple bar graph, arranged their programs in a sequential manner. In other words, they would do one part of the program and then go to the next, then go to the next, etc. But always completing the first part before you go to the second. While a number of states, 7, did it concurrently, where you just did it a little bit throughout the day. So for instance, like in the West Virginia program, we would take students out for classroom for an hour, passenger in car for an hour, then driving for an hour, break for lunch, and then repeat the process in the afternoon. In 7 other states, we found that they set up optional programs where you could do it either sequentially or concurrently. What are the basic types of training? And who are some of the providers of this specialized training? As similar to basic driver education instruction, formalized bioptic driver training can be broken down into simply classroom, passenger in car, and behind the wheel instruction. This graph looks kind of complex, but it can be easily broken down. For instance, it takes a look at 4 different types of training that oftentimes low vision drivers will be exposed to. If you're device training after you've been seen by your clinician, if your device training is part of their program package, you may be receiving some instruction not only from the doctor, but their, let's say, clinical low vision therapist before you actually start driver's training. Where in other states, that device training is integrated into the passenger in car and behind the wheel. Notice there are at least 7 of those states that I have listed in the gray area, depending upon your age, may require training in all 4 areas: device, classroom, passenger in car, and behind the wheel. This particular bar graph takes a look at states that require set hours of training, or those in the middle bar there indicate required individualized competency-based programs, whether you're a novice or an experienced driver. Down at the bottom of the graph, it lists the various types of programs and the hours required per state that requires set hours of training. Now, since this is a low vision audience primarily, what I did was to take the lower third of this graph and magnify it. Okay. And now you know the states that require training, what the variability is. And just as an example, and all of these states, by the way, receive some of the staff and service training in the state of West Virginia. Let's start with Michigan. Michigan requires a combination of 100 hours of instruction for the typical bioptic user. And it has currently over 900 drivers. Okay. Let's take the look at Ohio. Ohio requires 10 hours of passenger in car, and then a combination of device, passenger car behind the wheel on an individual competency basis. Whereas if you take a look at West Virginia, we require 90 hours for novice drivers, yet individualized for experienced drivers with age onset visual conditions. So the thing that I would like to bring out to you in this particular slide is no two states are going to be the same. There is no standardization at this point as to the required number of hours or even the types of training. How does one locate a experienced, knowledgeable service provider who's willing to work with them as far as the bioptic lenses? If you go to the internet, and by the way, if you want a copy of my PowerPoint and the presenter notes, I will provide my email address near the end of the presentation so that you'll have this. But if you want to find a service provider, simply type in www.aded.net. And then you'll come to the ADAD website and you'll scroll down and you'll left click find a service provider. Then you'll go to the next window and you'll scroll down and you'll left click the circular shaped ADAD member icon. From there, it'll show you what country do you want, and you'll scroll down and select a country. Here I've selected the United States. Next, you scroll down and you select a state. I've selected West Virginia. At the bottom of the page, you hit window. And then you'll come to the West Virginia page and you select my name. Once you click on my name under program services, you click bioptic driving, and it provides you access to 6 to 8 pages of all the contact information of ADAD members who are currently in-car training service providers. This is one of the reasons why I want you to have a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. So let's take a look at what are some of the typical areas in a training program that are oftentimes offered. And you've noticed that I've used kind of bold cursive print for the first 4 bulleted areas over on the left side of the screen. And I'll share in a couple of seconds why I've done that. But as you scan those, you can get an idea. It kind of falls in place with typical high school driver education programs, with the exception of the use of bioptic driving skills. And the last bulleted area, those acronyms stand for global positioning systems, collision avoidance systems, or advanced driver assistance systems. Those are all optional areas in current programs. One of the states that offer collision avoidance systems is the state of Alabama. Now, if you would like access to a booklet that we put together as a result of those workshops out in Texas, and it's available not only in standard but large print size, I've published a book and I have the permission by Texas School for the Blind to distribute this free of charge to anyone who emails me. But instead of using the email address on the booklet, over on the left-hand side of the slide is my email address. It's all lowercase, Chuck_Huss, that's HUSS, at hotmail.com. From here, you'll gain access to distance viewing skills, critical object awareness skills, basic bioptic usage skills, hazard perception skills, and exercises that you and your parents or guardian can reinforce as active passengers in car. The standard at the present time for in-car training by an instructor is usually about 20 hours. When it comes to completing your program, how does the instructor know? How does the student know that you've satisfactorily completed the program? What most states are going to is an in-car, on-road dynamic driving assessment. And what that includes is it's usually going to be one that's standardized in nature. And by standardized, we're talking about where the same test or the same assessment is going to be administered to all the students who go through the program. The same route, the same instructions, the same rating procedures. In the state of West Virginia, we take a look at 2 scores. The first is, did a student driver increase or decrease the likelihood of hazard or collision on rated sections of that route? And then secondly, what did the student driver do in terms of speed control, directional control, and visual search patterns? The assessment that's usually put together, we had ours put together by Michigan State, who had already validated this process, called driver performance measurement, was a combination of everyday type of driving tasks versus those that will challenge even the best driver. And we use it in our current program currently as the final competency for satisfactory completion of the course. Now, here are a couple of examples for the DPM, a simple left-hand turn across oncoming traffic. Now, why is that a big issue for low vision individuals? Well, if you notice, the first vehicle is dark colored, the second oncoming vehicle is a light gray color, and the third colored car is a whiter colored car. This can pose challenges, especially for individuals with albinism, especially if they have contrast sensitivity issues. Here's one of our more challenging type of tasks. It involves multiple lane changes and then getting into a mutual turn left lane and turning left across 3 lanes of oncoming traffic. Finally, we get to driver license testing. This is going to surprise you. There are 2 types of tests that could be administered to the low vision candidate. One could be the standard road test, as some states have now chosen to pursue, or a special, more complex, more challenging, longer, more in-depth test called a special road test. Dr. Porter mentioned that there will be driving restrictions applied. Usually, not always, but usually, it's going to be daytime only and BTLS in place. Those are going to be required. Some states also have what they call case-by-case restrictions. In other words, if it's a young novice driver who's never driven, they may put a limitation on how fast they're permitted to drive, or no interstate driving for the first or second year, or a certain mile radius from home. Most states, not all though, after 1 or more years, have an appeal process where you can attempt to remove those restrictions. This is what I wanted to show you from my survey. I expected most states to tell me that they had a special road test after completion of their formalized program. But guess what? It was 3-to-1 as far as states that do not require versus states that still do require a special road test. However, even though that's the way it's currently being executed by most states, why am I a strong proponent of special road testing? The reason is a special road test provides immediate evidence of driver competency. It's also a good safeguard in states where driver training is either not required where it's optional or it's limited in scope. It can also provide good information in a court or administrative hearing proceedings. As I near the end of my presentation, what I wanted to share with you is if you want more information about bioptic driving, I'm providing you a list of authors and what they've either published, whether it's training, articles, etc., where you can gain access. And I've also provided their up-to-date email address. So please take a look at that once you obtain the copy of my PowerPoint. Concluding remarks. Despite bioptic driving being allowed now in most states, in fact, it's allowed in 48 states, 49 licensing jurisdictions in the US. In Canada, it's spreading like wildfire. It's now allowed in Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and I've heard word that there may be one driver finally in British Columbia. It's also being addressed in the European Union. Denmark finally got their first driver there. It's been present in the Netherlands since 2007. But despite it being allowed, there remains wide variability as far as the vision requirements, funding for these services, the type and extent of services, and licensure requirements for drivers with known low vision from one jurisdiction to the next. However, most licensing jurisdictions now recognize the importance of client pre-driver readiness to reduce the length, the extent, and the cost of bioptic driving if you're required to pay for services.
Thank you, everybody, so much for coming.
Thanks,
And
Casey.
have a great night.